Hello, classmates. Today I'm going to be talking to you about an issue that is very contentious, which is merit-based pay for teachers. Before doing this research project, I basically knew nothing about merit-based pay for teachers. Uh, I've always worked at a private school before this year, and never worked in the public sector. So for me, it was interesting to find out how teachers are paid. So the existing pay structure, um, or how most teachers are paid now, almost all teachers, especially those in public school, is a step-based pay, which means that your pay increases based on your seniority, how many years of experience you have. And it also increases based on your level of education. So for example, when I went in to interview at St. Louis Public Schools, I was shown a chart that tells me exactly how much I can expect to be paid based on the fact that I have a master's degree and 4 years of experience. And it was interesting for me to be shown this kind of pay scale because I never have worked in the public sector before. And it was a bit disheartening to me to find that no matter how excellently I performed or what I did, um, I would be paid exactly the same. It was completely not based on performance in any way. And there's a quote down here that I kind of um, liked. It's by Rubino, and he says that the disadvantages of step-paced pay are kind of obvious because all you have to do is show up to your job and, you know, kind of fill the minimum requirements and you'll get your rate increase. And its performance is kind of neither here nor there. Um, and as I said at the beginning, there because of the problems with this, a lot of alternative compensation sort of structures are being looked at. And there's actually four different types of teacher-based pay. The first one is merit-based pay, which is based on each teacher's individual improvement. So you would be given a list of things to improve maybe at the beginning of the year, and then if you did them, you would be given some sort of bonus. The second one is knowledge and skills-based pay. So that means if you acquire extra education or certifications, or you do some professional development, then you can receive bonuses based on that. The third is performance pay based on standardized test scores, and this refers to actually individual teachers and their students and their standardized tests. So if you're a math teacher and the students in your class perform poorly on the standardized math test, then it's kind of deemed to be your fault, and you wouldn't get a bonus. The fourth is school-based performance pay, which means that as an institution, your school, has goals, or they want to improve overall test scores. And if your whole school together does that, then all the teachers receive some sort of monetary bonus. Of these, number three, the performance-based pay based on standardized test scores has been shown to be the least effective. And it's pretty unfair, and we'll go through the pros and cons in a minute. But it's not really a fair judge of teaching excellence to say that just because children in one classroom perform poorly, that the teacher is necessarily a bad teacher. There are a lot of factors that go into how students do on tests. As far as why we're even considering implementing more teacher-based pay, teacher-based pay has kind of come in and out of popularity since the early 1900s, but it's being looked at it again. And the reason is that we have a teacher shortage in America. And in addition to that, as far as internationally, American students aren't really above average. They score slightly below average in math and then slightly above in literacy, which is kind of frustrating for a developed nation. So teacher-based pay has been looked at as a way to maybe improve some of these outcomes. So here's a few important reasons why it's being considered. One is that it's actually hard for schools to hire teachers and know whether or not the teacher is going to be a good fit for students. So lots of degrees do not necessarily a wonderful teacher make. For example, I know a teacher who I observed had 4 degrees. He had degrees in I think he had 4 bachelor's degrees and was working on a master's. And he was really smart and, very educated, obviously, but he was not a good teacher. And he had been hired based on the fact that he had 4 degrees, which looks good, but doesn't necessarily mean you know how to teach or that you know how to control a classroom. Another reason is that the current salary offerings and the raise schedules don't incentivize young people to pursue teaching as a career. As this says, it takes a lot of education to become a teacher, at least 4 years, unless you get a master's, in which case it's more like 6 years, and it's expensive. And then you get out of school and the job that you get doesn't pay your bills, and certainly doesn't merit the money that you spent getting your education. For example, the job that my husband got with a 4-year bachelor's degree in engineering was very, very different than the salary that I can get, even with 6 years education in education. So, another thing is that teachers are the most important factor affecting student performance. It's shown that they're even more important than curriculum or the class size, how much money the district gets, how involved the community is. The most influential factor is the teacher. And so because of this, it's thought, well, if we can increase teacher quality, then we can increase student performance. Another reason teacher-based pay is being considered is that the current pay system has kind of forced a lot of teachers to leave teaching altogether, or to leave the classroom to pursue administration goals so that they can make more money, or to just pursue jobs in districts that have fewer disadvantaged students. So, they kind of know they can't really make any more money, but at least they can increase their quality of their environment. And so they leave these, more difficult schools and more disadvantaged students to teach in environments where at least the kids are tend to be more highly performing academically and behaviorally. And none of these things are going to get us as a society any closer to having students that perform above average internationally. There are a lot of arguments for and against teacher-based pay, and if you go online, you'll see there's so many. It's an extremely contentious issue, and it's a many-sided issue. It's really complicated. But I'm going to highlight just a few of the most obvious ones that I found. The first one I found that I don't think is a very good argument is that teaching is not a business, it's a service industry. By the same rationale, you could also say that being a nurse and a doctor is a service industry. And the counterpoint to this is that despite this argument that teaching is not a business, actually there are many private schools, and private schools are growing really rapidly, which indicates that treating teaching like a business is not necessarily incompatible with education goals. And moreover, just because teaching has been viewed as a service industry doesn't mean that it must continue to be seen that way. Just because something is a certain way doesn't mean it has to just continue to satisfy the status quo. Another argument is that it would be a PR nightmare for parents and teachers. So if it were publicized that, such and such a teacher is receiving more than this teacher, and then, parents kind of would know who are the best teachers, and they would, fight to get their kids in those classes, and it would be really difficult for administrators who would have to be responsible for making decisions about who gets paid what. And I do agree that actually that would be kind of complicated. I would not want to be the administrator tasked with that. But on the other hand, there's a thought that it will apply healthy pressure on schools to hire and retain the best teachers. And it's also argued that there's really no difference between providing information about who the good teachers are and providing information about who the best doctors are. It's not necessarily, sorry about this. It's not necessarily a good idea to suppress information about, who the highest quality teachers are. We would never want that in other areas of our lives, such as who the best doctor is, who the best nurse is, who the best lawyer is. All those things are publicized online, and none of us even think about it. Another argument is that it's too expensive, and it probably is more expensive. The argument against is that the schools already spend money on pay raises, which they do. They have incremental pay raises. And that the only difference is that the pay raises just don't have anything to do with performance. So if you could change that, then perhaps you could, just split up the pie a little bit differently. I think this is not a great argument. I do think it will cost more to do merit-based pay, and I think it's not as fair. So for instance, my husband works at Garmin, and at the end of the year, if Garmin has a lot of money left over, then they give people bonuses. But a school is not like that. At the end of the year, there's never a pile of money left over to be divvied up into bonuses. And so it's not quite the same thing. In this model, some teachers will lose out and some will get bonuses, regardless of just because of the nature of schools and how they're funded. Some more arguments. Let's see. Some people argue that it creates a lot of competition among colleagues. Depending on how you dole out the rewards, that could be true or not true. I guess if you pit teachers against each other with standardized test scores, that could be true. But if you reward, for example, collaboration, then it could create more collaboration with colleagues. So it just depends on what you reward. There are a lack of clear measures for what makes a good teacher, and that is so true. I think trying to define and reward what makes a good teacher would be very complicated, especially if you were going to mandate it with some kind of policy. Not only that, but depending on what school you are, what makes a good teacher varies from place to place. Some teachers do great in certain environments and others do better in others. And, trying to pin down exactly what makes a good teacher and then compensate it with money would be very difficult. And I haven't seen in my research really a good way to do that. Another argument is that others factors besides teacher quality affect the student outcomes, which is true. If you teach at a school that's where all the kids live in poverty and they come from difficult situations, that's a huge contributing factor. And no matter how good of a teacher you are, it may not affect, your student outcomes may always be lower just because of the students you teach. However, I will say that on the other side of that, research shows that teacher quality does impact student outcomes more than any other factor, and that includes, how high or low the district income is. Another argument against is that it rewarding for student outcomes will disincentivize teachers to pursue careers in low-performing schools. And I think that is somewhat true. But it was also pointed out that teachers already avoid low-performing schools, which if you look online at the job openings, you will know is true. There are always school openings for teachers in districts that are underperforming, and they always have a difficult time staffing. So if you reward gains instead of, just overall end scores, then there's actually more room for growth at a school that is currently low performing. So It kind of depends again on how those bonuses